Hi, my name is Evan Myers in speech class SPC 2608, and I decided to write my informative speech on Moneyball, The Art of Winning an Unfair Game by Michael Lewis. This story has a really close connection to me because I grew up playing baseball, and for the greater part of my life growing up, I eat, sleep, and breathe baseball. The story starts off in the late 80s with Billy Beane coming up as a high school player, and he was described as a five-tool player when he was drafted first round by the New York Mets. He would quickly come up through the Mets organization, but once he reached the major league level, he was immediately rattled and quickly fell off. And it wasn't too long after that he decided to quit baseball and became a GM. It was in this role that he found his most success in his career. The book really starts to highlight around the 2002 Oakland Athletics, and they were experiencing a huge salary issue. They had a lot of players who were paid a lot more money than they were worth, and they had a big problem coming off that playoff run, and they really had some holes to fix. It wasn't until the early 2000s when he met Peter DePodesta, who was working currently for the Cleveland Indians organization, and found out that he had an algorithm to which he could evaluate players in a way that had never been seen before. He used statistical analysis that would value players in a way he was able to take undervalued players who were on other teams and then bring them over to his side while also offloading all the overplayed players off of his. Now, this is a very important strategy in baseball because more often than not, you'll see a lot of the big names who will get most of the contracts and not the smaller guys. Billy Beane, who worked for a small market team in the Oakland Athletics, decided he has to do something because he simply doesn't have the money to pay the big players, not like the Chicago Cubs or the New York Yankees. So he decided to find a different way. He showed that there was much more to player acquisition than having the look that a lot of scouts would look for. Like in the movie Moneyball, it was famously touted that one of the scouts said the player had an ugly girlfriend, so he didn't have enough confidence to play at that level, which, as we know, doesn't really make sense. But it also helped guys who didn't really seem to have that good of careers and would put them in positions where they could win. For example, Scott Hatteberg, who was a playoff success for their team, was overlooked by a lot of teams. However, Billy Beane noticed that his on-base percentage was much higher than most guys at his position. This was kind of unheard of because he was a catcher coming up in the organization and had an arm injury and was switched over to first base. And more often than not, when that happens to a player, their career is over. But for Scott Hatteberg, it was able to get him back into the game. Now, this was a very different time in baseball. In the late 90s, it was what is considered the live ball era. You have times where home runs was the big talk of the town. In the late 90s, 98, Sammy Sosa and Mark McGwire were hitting the most home runs that had ever been seen at that time and place. But Billy Beane had to do it a little differently. He didn't have the money to pay the Mark McGwires, the Sammy Sosas, or the Frank Thomases of that generation. Now, he used different statistics. At the time, most people were looking at batting average, RBIs, and home runs because, let's face it, that's what people want to see. That's what the fans like. But he would pick the players like the Scott Hattebergs of the generation who had the higher on-base percentage, and they were able to get on base and advance runners by any means necessary. And his statistics helped lead to what we call today WAR, which is a huge statistic that is used to value players, which is called wins above replacement. And this was an actual number of how many wins that player added to that team. For example, when you look at the all-time highest WAR, you have Barry Bonds, who added 162.8 games to his team's career, which was a big deal. For my third main point, this led to the game being played and evaluated very differently. When you have the Oakland Athletics who don't have much money, as the Rays, other teams like that, as small caliber teams, it led to the game being played a little differently. This led to small ball being played a little higher. This put more emphasis on advancing the runners and just getting people on base, unlike the long ball. For example, these guys, they would put more emphasis on bunts, hit and runs, sacrifice bunts, and basically doing whatever it took to advance the runners. And to do this, Billy Beane compiled large sums of data on individual players to see who was undervalued, i.e. who he could pay, and to see who was overvalued, who he could sell. Like at the time he had Jeremy Giambi, who was Jason Giambi's brother, and yes, he had that famous name of a guy who hit a lot of home runs, but he just didn't have that production. And it was important that he was able to offload those contracts and make more room for his team to get more players. So now these aspects have shaped and molded the game differently than how it was originally portrayed. With all this in mind, baseball has been changed forever. And now that the owners, general managers are using more of a statistical approach to recruit players. This goes into sabermetrics, launch angle off the ball, how hard they hit it, a whole plethora of different statistics that are coming into play nowadays. So that just goes to show you how important statistical analysis is in grading players and seeing how GMs everywhere all around the league can improve their team and just to make a better difference. And it's with the help of these statistics that small market teams, such as the teams I stated earlier, and the Rays, the Athletics, and the Cincinnati Reds, have a chance at being a very competitive team against the capital-rich giants in the New York Yankees, the Boston Red Sox, and the Cubs. And honestly, as a lifelong baseball fan, it's helped me grow and understand the game much deeper than what we see on TV.